I keep coming back to the smell of gardenias because my mother-in-law had arranged them on every table, and I used to love gardenias. I don't anymore. My baby shower was on a Saturday in late October. The leaves were turning outside the community center my mother-in-law had reserved, and the light through the windows was that soft, amber kind that makes everything look warmer than it is. She had done everything herself. The centerpieces, the favors, the little chalkboard sign at the entrance with my name and my due date written in looping cursive. She had sent me photos of the room before guests arrived, and I had cried. The good kind of crying, I thought. I texted my husband that his mother was incredible. He texted back a heart. I was 7 months pregnant. I was tired all the time, the way pregnancy makes you tired, where it's not just your body but something deeper. Like your soul is also growing something it wasn't designed to carry. My back hurt. My ankles were swollen. I hadn't slept more than 4 hours at a stretch in 6 weeks, but I put on the dress I bought specifically for that day. Blush pink, empire waist, the kind of dress that exists only for baby showers. And I'd smiled at every single person who walked through that door. My mother-in-law's name is Sandra. She is 61 years old, 5'4", with silver streaked hair she wears in a smooth bun and reading glasses. She keeps on a beaded chain around her neck. She volunteers at her church. She brings casseroles to sick neighbors. She remembers everyone's birthday. Every person at that shower adored her. I had adored her too, for 3 years, the entire length of my relationship with her son. I want you to understand that before I tell you the rest. I want you to understand that I did not walk into that room suspicious. I walked in grateful. The gifts came midway through, after the little sandwiches and the fruit skewers and the mocktail punch my mother-in-law had made specifically because I couldn't drink. I sat in the decorated chair at the front of the room, and my best friend, I'll call her Pam, sat beside me to write down who gave what so I could send thank you notes later. There were onesies and a stroller attachment and a white noise machine and a handmade quilt from my aunt that made me cry again. My mother-in-law sat across from me the whole time, watching. She was smiling. I remember thinking she looked proud. Near the end of the pile, she stood up and walked over with a large manila envelope. Not wrapped, just a thick envelope with a metal clasp, the kind you'd use for official documents. She held it out to me and said in front of everyone, "This is the most important gift I could give you both." Her voice was warm. The room cooed. I took it, laughing a little, and I opened the clasp and pulled out what was inside. It was a deed. To a house. I looked at it, and I felt my face do something complicated. The address was a property in the next town over, a place my husband and I had looked at 8 months earlier and decided we couldn't afford. I looked up at Sandra. She was beaming. "I bought it for you," she said. "For the family." The room erupted. Applause. Someone said, "Oh my God." Pam grabbed my arm. I could feel the weight of everyone's joy pressing on me, and all I could think, looking down at that deed, was, why isn't my husband's name on it? I looked again, more carefully this time. My name wasn't on it either. Sandra's name was on it. Sandra's name, and underneath it, in the line marked co-owner, a name I didn't recognize at all. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. The room was still clapping, and someone had started taking pictures, and Sandra had leaned down to hug me, and I let her, the paper still in my hands, my brain trying to catch up with what my eyes had just read. I folded the deed back into the envelope. I said thank you. I said I was overwhelmed. Both of those things were true, just not in the way anyone in that room understood. I didn't tell my husband that night. He was so happy when I came home. He had ordered dinner from my favorite Thai place, and he had the couch set up with pillows, and he asked me how it went, and I said it was beautiful. Because it had been beautiful. That's the thing about Sandra. She could build something beautiful right on top of something rotten, and you wouldn't know until you tried to dig. I told myself I had misread the document. I told myself I was tired, the pregnancy brain was real, that I had glanced at a legal document, at a baby shower, while simultaneously managing a room full of people watching me, and of course I had gotten it wrong. I set the envelope on the kitchen counter, and I went to bed, and I did not sleep. The next morning, after my husband left for work, I took the deed out again. I had not misread it. The property was listed under Sandra's name as primary owner. The co-owner was listed as someone named Gary Tellman. I typed that name into my browser. It took less than 4 minutes to find him. Gary Tellman, 64, semi-retired. He had a LinkedIn profile that hadn't been updated in 2 years. He had a Facebook that was mostly public, mostly fishing photos and posts from a hunting club. He was, based on everything I could find, a complete stranger to me. But he was not a stranger to Sandra. I found a photo. It was in the background of one of Sandra's Facebook posts from the previous Christmas, a group shot at a family gathering, people I didn't recognize, and there in the back, slightly blurred, was a man in a red flannel shirt standing very close to Sandra. I had never seen this photo before. I had never been invited to that Christmas gathering. Sandra had told my husband it was just her sisters that year. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time with my hands flat on the surface, the way you do when you're trying to stay calm and your body knows it. I called my mother. She said, "Slow down, read me the documents again." I read it to her word by word. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Sweetheart, I think you need to talk to a real estate attorney." I almost didn't. I almost convinced myself there was an explanation. Maybe Sandra had bought the house jointly with an old family friend for some financial reason I didn't understand. Maybe it was a tax thing. Maybe I was catastrophizing. I was pregnant and exhausted, and I wanted everything to be fine. But I made the appointment. The attorney's name was Linda, and she was the kind of woman who doesn't waste words. I spread the deed on her desk, and she looked at it for about 45 seconds before she looked up at me. "How long have you known this Gary Tellman?" I told her I didn't know him at all. She nodded like that wasn't a surprise. "And your name, or your husband's name, were you expecting to be on this?" I said yes. Sandra had presented it as a gift to us, to the family. Linda nodded again. Then she pulled out her own laptop and started running searches I didn't know how to run, pulling up property records and filing histories and cross-referencing things faster than I could follow. After about 20 minutes, she turned the screen toward me. There were 3 properties. Not just the house from the shower. 3 properties total, all purchased in the last 4 years, all with Gary Tellman listed as co-owner alongside Sandra. And on one of them, a rental property 2 towns over. The original purchase documents had been filed with a signature that was supposed to be my husband's. Power of attorney. Signed over to Sandra 18 months ago. My husband had never mentioned giving his mother power of attorney. My husband had never mentioned any of this. I drove home in a kind of silence I had never experienced before. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of a room after something breaks. That split second before you decide whether to cry or start cleaning up. I want to stop here and tell you something, because I know what you're thinking. I've read enough of these stories myself to know. You're thinking, why didn't she just ask her husband? Why didn't she call Sandra right then? Why didn't she go to the police? I've asked myself the same questions, and the answer is the same every time. Because when someone you love has spent years being perfect, your first instinct is to protect that image, even from yourself. Sandra had been so good to me. She had been at every doctor's appointment I invited her to. She had helped me register for baby things. She had sat with me for 2 hours once when I had a pregnancy scare at 12 weeks, and she had held my hand and told me everything was going to be okay. You don't just flip from that to this. Your brain won't let you. It keeps trying to find a version of events where the person you trusted is still trustworthy. So I gave myself 3 days. I told myself, 3 days to gather information before I say anything to anyone. I am not going to blow up my marriage and my family 8 weeks before I give birth, without being absolutely certain. I called the county recorder's office. They confirmed the filing. The power of attorney document was legitimate, on file, notarized 18 months earlier in the state. I asked for a copy and they mailed it to me. When the copy arrived, I sat at the kitchen table again, and I opened it, and I read my husband's signature at the bottom, and I thought about all the times Sandra had come by when I wasn't home. I thought about the afternoon she had offered to help sort out some paperwork for us because we'd been overwhelmed after buying our current house. My husband had mentioned it casually, like it was nothing. She was just helping with some administrative stuff. He hadn't mentioned it again. I think he didn't know what he signed. I've thought about this a lot since then. Whether he was complicit, or whether he was just careless in the way that some people are careless with their parents. The way they sign things without reading because they've never had a reason not to trust. I came to believe it was the second thing. But getting there took a long time. I told him on a Wednesday night, sitting at the kitchen table with the documents spread between us. I had organized everything. The deed from the shower, the attorney's notes, the power of attorney copy, the 3 property records, the photo of Gary Tillman. I had put them in order and I had rehearsed what I was going to say because I knew that if I just started talking, I would fall apart. He didn't say anything for a very long time after I finished. Then he said, "She told me it was just refinancing paperwork." I didn't say anything. He picked up the power of attorney copy. He read it. He set it down. He picked it up again. "I didn't know what this was," he said. "I know," I said. "I need to call her." "I know," I said. "I need to call her." "I know," I said again. He called her. I stayed in the room because I needed to hear it. I need to be honest about that. I needed to hear whether he was going to believe me or believe her, and I needed to know before I made any further decisions about what I was willing to do next. Sandra answered on the second ring. I could hear her voice through the phone, that warm church volunteer voice, and she said, "Hello, sweetheart." And my husband said, "Mom, I need to ask you something." He asked her about the power of attorney. She said it was for estate planning. She said she had just needed his signature for a formality. She said she had meant to explain it better and she was sorry for the confusion. He asked her about Gary Tillman. She paused, just a half second. But I heard it. She said Gary was an old friend who had helped her navigate the property purchases, someone with real estate experience, and that she had put him on the deed temporarily for legal reasons that she would explain when we could all sit down together. He asked her about the rental property 2 towns over, the one with his signature on the original deed. She said she didn't know what he was referring to. I watched my husband's face change. I had never seen him look at his mother's name on his phone screen the way he looked at it in that moment. Like something had shifted in the way he understood what he was looking at. "She doesn't know what I'm referring to," he said, mostly to himself. "I know," I said. We went back to Linda's office together the following week. She had already done more digging by then. The rental property, the one with my husband's alleged signature, had been generating rental income for 18 months, deposited into an account in Sandra's name and Gary Tillman's name jointly. The total that had passed to that account was just over $62,000. None of it had gone to my husband. None of it had been reported in any way that connected to us. Linda used the word fraud. She said it quietly and specifically, the way attorneys say the words that matter. My husband filed a police report that afternoon. I sat next to him in the waiting area of the precinct, and I held his hand because whatever else was true, he was sitting in a police station about to report his own mother, and I was not going to let him do that alone. The investigation took 4 months. I gave birth to my daughter in the middle of it in December in a hospital room with my husband holding one hand and my mother holding the other, and Sandra was not there because we had told her she was not welcome until everything was resolved. She sent flowers. I didn't put them in the room. My daughter was healthy. 8 pounds, 4 ounces. She had her father's nose and my stubbornness, or so the nurses said. I held her in that hospital room and I thought about the gardenia centerpieces and the blush dress and the moment I had opened that envelope in a room full of applause, and I thought, this is the thing Sandra did not get to control. This moment. This. The case resolved in February. Sandra had forged my husband's signature on the rental property deed. The handwriting analysis confirmed it. Gary Tillman, it turned out, was not a real estate advisor. He was a man Sandra had been in a relationship with for 2 years, a fact she had hidden from her son entirely. The properties had been acquired using a combination of Sandra's savings and money redirected from a joint account she still had access to from the years when my husband was in college, and she had managed his finances. The account had technically never been fully closed. She was charged with 1 count of forgery and 1 count of financial fraud. She pleaded guilty to a reduced charge as part of a negotiated agreement. She received 3 years of probation, was ordered to pay restitution, and was required to transfer the properties into my husband's name. Gary Tellman was named in the civil suit and settled. We did not speak to Sandra for 11 months. I want to be clear, my husband made that decision himself. I told him early on that I would support whatever relationship he chose to have with his mother, that it was not my place to make that choice for him, but that I also had limits on what I was willing to expose our daughter to while she was still an infant and while I was still healing. He respected that. He is a good man. This thing that happened is not the sum of him. He eventually agreed to supervised contact, a therapist's office, structured visits, no private access to our finances or our home. It was a long conversation, several of them, and some of them were very hard, and I am not going to pretend we didn't have nights where we sat in separate rooms and the distance between us felt like something that might not close. But it closed. What I know now that I didn't know the morning of that baby shower. Sandra had been managing money in my husband's name since he was 19 years old, when his father died and she became the sole financial decision-maker in their family. It had started as genuine necessity. She didn't have much and she was trying to be careful, and she had real estate instincts that turned out to be good. Over time, careful had calcified into control, and control had calcified into something she didn't have a name for anymore. The therapist we eventually started seeing, together and separately, used the word enmeshment. She had built her sense of security entirely around her son's financial life, and when he married me and started building something separate, she had started building something parallel, something he didn't know about, that she could control entirely, that Gary Tellman was a part of, that was hers. I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for her. I'm telling you this because it matters to understand how something like this happens. It doesn't start with malice, usually. It starts with a person who is very afraid, making small accommodations to that fear, for years and years, until the accommodations become the architecture of their whole life. That doesn't make what she did okay. It was not okay. The forgery was not okay. The theft was not okay. The lie sustained over months and in front of a room full of people who trusted her was not okay. She is on probation. She will be on probation for 3 years. That is a consequence, and I believe in consequences. But I am also raising her granddaughter, and my daughter is going to ask questions someday about the woman she sees occasionally in a therapist's office who brings her small gifts and calls her by her name carefully, the way you handle something you almost lost for good. I don't have a clean ending for this. I thought for a long time that I needed one, some bow to tie it up with, some moment of clarity that would make the whole thing feel resolved. But life doesn't resolve the way stories do. What I have is my daughter's face in the morning, which is currently my favorite thing that exists. My husband making coffee in the kitchen, the ordinary sound of it. A house in our name, only our names, that we bought ourselves 6 months ago without anyone's help, without anyone's interference. I still don't like gardenias, but I know how to open an envelope now without assuming what's inside is a gift. I used to think trust was something you either had or you didn't. That you gave it to people and they either kept it or they broke it, and the breaking was always sudden. A door slamming, a voice raised, a moment you could point to and say, there, that's when it happened. But that's not how it worked with Sandra. With Sandra, it happened the way water gets into a foundation. Slowly, invisibly, in places you're not looking, until one day something shifts and you realize the damage has been there for years. What I've had to sit with, long after the court dates and the restitution orders and the probation paperwork, is this. I didn't fail to see the signs because I was naive. I failed to see them because I was trusting, and those are not the same thing. Being naive means you don't know better. Being trusting means you chose to believe in someone because the evidence you had, the casseroles, the hand-holding at 12 weeks, the gardenia centerpieces, pointed toward a person worth believing in. I made a reasonable choice with the information I had. That is not a character flaw. That is just being human. What Sandra did, the forgery, the redirected income, the years of quiet financial maneuvering, grew out of fear that had never been addressed and control that had never been questioned. She had managed her son's money since he was 19 years old. And somewhere in that long stretch of years, the line between taking care of and taking had dissolved completely. She hadn't made one dramatic choice to betray us. She had made 100 small ones, each one easy to justify in the moment, until the justifications had built a structure she couldn't dismantle without destroying herself. That is what unchecked fear does to a person over time. It doesn't announce itself. It just slowly narrows what you're willing to see, until the only thing that feels safe is the thing you can control. I'm not excusing it. I want to be clear about that. She stood in a room full of people who loved her and handed me a document that was the surface of a lie she had been living for 4 years. She forged her own son's signature. She took money that wasn't hers. Those are choices, not symptoms. And choices have consequences. She is living hers. But what I carry forward isn't bitterness. It's something closer to clarity. I know now that love is not a guarantee of honesty. I know that a person can be genuinely warm in some rooms and genuinely dangerous in others, and the warmth doesn't cancel the danger. I know that when something feels wrong, when a document doesn't add up, when a name appears where no name should be, the most important thing I can do is stay calm, stay curious, and get to the truth before I decide what to do with it. Not panic, not confront. Know first. My daughter is 7 months old now. She doesn't know any of this yet. Someday, in whatever form is appropriate for her age and her understanding, she will. And what I want her to take from it is not suspicion of people she loves. I want her to know that she is allowed to ask questions. The documents matter and she should read them. That love and accountability are not opposites. The people who genuinely love you will be willing to be accountable to you. And that healing from betrayal isn't about reaching forgiveness on anyone else's timeline. It's about getting solid enough in yourself that the thing that happened to you does not become the thing that defines you. I opened an envelope at my baby shower and found a stranger's name where my family's name should have been. I didn't fall apart. I got a lawyer. I got the truth. And I built something on ground that actually belonged to us. That's the part I want her to remember.